A lot of questions about the current admission trend and what's been going on for the last few years. And I'll just show you a bit about our own statistics. So in back in 2020, 33% of our students got into Ivy League or top 10, and 60% got into top 25. Um, in 2021, about 10% of our students got into Ivy League and top 10. So there was a decrease there. And the top 25, 45% of our students got in, whereas the top 50, 100% of our students still got into to the U.S. universities. So there was something that happened between 2020 to 2021. Number one is that the SAT became optional. And when that happened, a lot of the students who got pretty good grades or a perfect score on their GPA, but they don't have a good score on the SAT, they would try to apply to a top university. So a lot of the SAT optional had led to an increase in number of application between 2020 to 2021. If you look at the MIT information, the class of 2025 is basically back in 2021. Between 2020 to 2021, they saw an increase of 66% in the number of applications that was submitted to MIT. So 66% is quite drastic in the number of students. That's kind of like unheard of in terms of how many students applied, because if you look at MIT, right, like if you look at any universities, the number of applications has been steadily increasing, but it's not 60%. It's been probably increasing by like 10, 15%. And then in just this 1 year, it increased by 66%. And what is crazy is that this year, the number of applications is still increasing by about 10 to 15%, which is normal. But because last year was so much higher, the increase of 15% this year just showed, like it's a bit it's a bit hard to imagine how much more application there is comparing to 2 years ago. So there's a lot more people applying. And if you look at UC Berkeley, it says that 128,000 students applied this year, but 2 years ago, it was only 88,000. So that is a huge increase for the UC system as well. And that's been kind of what is happening across the board in the top 50 US university, is that there's an increase in number of application, lower admit rate, especially during the last 2 years. If we look back to our the number of students that got admitted, it got lower in 2021. We got a pretty decent number of students that got accepted still to Ivy Leagues. And Berkeley, we had 5 students. UCLA, we had 7 students, which was more than 2020, where we had 4 Berkeley and 4 UCLA. And Northwestern, we had 3 students that year. And then this year, 2021, we had 1 student. And if we go to 2022, we had an improvement in terms of the number of students that got accepted into the top 10. We got 17% this year instead of 10%. And then number of top 25, it decreased a bit to 40%. And I think a big part of that reason is because UC Berkeley and UCLA had to decrease the number of students that they can accept from out-of-state students, so international students, and also outside of California. If you look at the reason why, so for out-of-state applicants, this cycle have been more difficult than previous ones. So this is a newspaper that was current newspaper 2022. Due to renewed pressure from the state to reduce out-of-state undergrad enrollment by 18%, and they need to decrease this all the way until 2026 to 2027. And the reason is because the California residents are paying tax, right? And a lot of the tuition fee for California residents is also lower. But it's because it's a state university, so they need to support the local students in the state. So that has been happening last year to this year. So the number of students that we got at UC Berkeley this year is only one, and the number of students we got from UCLA, we have five. Sorry, we have four. So four students UCLA, one student to Berkeley. USC, for some reason, we had more students this year than previous years, as well as Northwestern. But we got also Brown, Penn, and Princeton, which is a great accomplishment for a few of our students. And we also have Rice University, which is a top 20 university. So in terms of our acceptance rate, it has improved. But in terms of the UC application, it has become harder this year because of the UC system wanting having to accept more students from California. And if you look at the number of students applying to UCLA, both the transfer and the freshman student, there's about 168,000 people applying, which is a 24 increase compared to last year. But last year was already like around 30%. So which is quite high. And also it shows here, on top of that, the number of students that they accept in the top 10% or top 9% in their high school class, there was a 32% increase. That means a lot of smart students are applying to UCLA, and they're in the top 10% or 9 to 10% of their high school class. And this increase of 32% just showed how much tougher UCLA admission has been, because a lot of students are just very, very smart on top of their class, and they're just trying to get into UCLA. And if you look at so there is this link right here that shows how many students applied and then how many students were admitted. The interesting part about this, it has been that if you look at UC Berkeley, for example, and then you look at international residents, the number of so this is up to 2021, so it doesn't show 2022, but the number of student increased drastically from 17,000 to 20,000. So it's about what, like 25 to 30% increase. The number of students that got admitted also increased last year, but this year it has decreased. It doesn't show here yet. I'm still trying to find the number, but it should be decreasing because of the out-of-state budget that they had to cut. So that's been happening in the UC system as well. And if you look at a lot of the universities like Rice University, which is a top 20 university, but not super popular, their acceptance rate is below 10% now. So it's almost 9%, 8.5. I remember UPenn acceptance rate was about 8% like 3-4 years ago. So now Rice is about 8%, which is quite low. Harvard is 3%, Stanford is 3%, and that has decreased quite a lot. And if you look at this number right here, so if you look at the overall acceptance rate, all the Ivy Leagues are basically below 10%. With the exception of Cornell, everyone is below 6%. So Dartmouth, Cornell is still about 6 to 8, and then the rest is about 5% and below. So that has been quite a big adjustment in terms of the number of percentage that it went down, especially last year. Last year's number is about the same. 2 years ago, the numbers, it was about 2% to 3% higher. And so this is just very, very low, right? I mean, it was low like 2 years ago, but now it's just a lot lower. And if we compare this to international universities, because I have a lot of students who gets discouraged, or they get sad when they don't get in. But honestly speaking, if you compare this to the rest of the world, like Oxford admit rate, it's about 15%, 15 to 16%. And if you look at the number of application, it's about 25,000 students applying. and 3,800 get admitted. But if you look at the Ivy League, like Harvard, it's about 61,000 students applying, and the number of admitted student is about 1,800, comparing to Oxford, where they admit about 3,800 with 21,000 application. The number of 60,000 is about three times higher than Oxford in terms of number of application. And then the number of admit is only 1,800, so a lot lower. So in terms of like our students applying to other countries like Toronto, so Toronto acceptance rate is about 43%. We have a lot of students that didn't get into top 40, 50 US uni, but they get into University of Toronto, as well as Sydney. Sydney acceptance rate is about 30%. I do have a few students, that apply to multiple countries, but 30% acceptance rate, and they admit about so the overall number of the University of Sydney population is 49,000. Um, and if you look at the number of international students, it's about 22,000, which is quite high. But if you look at the U.S. universities, number of students in Harvard is only 6,000, and 10% of that is international. So a lot of people ask me why that is, and I think number one is that a lot of the U.S. population is really big. It's the third largest population in the world. So in terms of number of students applying to their own universities in the U.S., it's quite a lot already. Whereas in Sydney or in Australia, population-wise, it's about 25 million people. So number of students that they need to get into their universities from international students, they can get a lot more in. So they can get students from other countries more. Uh, and in the U.S., there are a lot of universities out there, but it's still not enough to support the population. Especially there's a state school versus private school, where a state school have to intake more of their state students. And if you look at, the acceptance rate of many U.S. universities are below like 15%. So that's kind of crazy to think about. Like Barnard College is 14%. So that's like a liberal art college. UCLA is 14%. Um, and if you look at 15%, that's like the same as Oxford, right? Which is really hard to get in. Like 15% admit rate is, yeah, like 15 out of 100 students get in, basically. Uh, so 1.5 student out of 10 get in, which is really low. So that's something to think about, is that the US universities are typically a lot harder, and don't get discouraged if you don't get in, because it's just that hard to get in. And this is in the top 50 universities, I would say. That's, their admit rate is still about 20-25%. And a lot of our students who apply to multiple global countries, they do get into a few countries, and they get surprised that they don't get into the US, but they get into like UK or Canada or Australia like quite easily. So I tell a lot of my US university applicant, don't get discouraged. It is really hard. It is not easy. Not a lot of people will get in. I do have a lot of students who I thought can get into Ivy League but did not get in, and that happens all the time. And that's why a lot of people get discouraged really, really fast, especially after they hear the result of the admission. But I would highly say, look at this in a bigger picture. The reason is not you. The reason is just because the competitive nature of the number of students applying, and then the number of students they can accept. So hopefully that helps. But yeah, that's the trends that I have been seeing in the last few years.